Hi there, John McAdams here. Thanks a lot for joining me in this video where I talk about Nosler's new Whitetail Country ammunition. Now in this video, I'm going to talk about the highlights of this ammunition, who and what it is designed for, the available cartridges and bullet weights in this ammunition. I'll also talk about how it has performed at the range, both for me and some people I know in my audience and in the shooting industry. I'll talk about how it performed in ballistic gel, both bare ballistic gel and some gel with a shoulder blade embedded in it. I'll also talk about how it performed afield on deer. I shot a deer with it this past year, so did a couple other people I know. We'll talk about all of that stuff. And I'll also wrap things up with the pros and cons of this ammunition and who I think it is best suited for. Okay, so first I'll cover the highlights of this ammunition. Nosler rolled out the Whitetail Country line in late 2024. I think October 2024 they made their official announcement. Now, just like the name says, this stuff is designed and marketed specifically for whitetail deer hunters. And it is much more affordable than some of their other lines of ammunition. If you look in their trophy grade line of ammo for the 30-06, for instance, that'll run you about $55, maybe $60 a box before tax, before shipping, for a box of 20 bullets for the 30-06 with the Nosler Partition bullet. Now the Partition is a great bullet. I really like it, but one of the big downsides of it is the cost associated with that bullet. Well, for reference, Nosler is selling 30-06 ammo in their Whitetail Country line for about $35 a box, so it's a whole lot less expensive. How do they do that? Well, it starts with the bullet. They use their solid base projectile in their Whitetail Country line of ammo. Now this is .308 Winchester ammo, but they use that same bullet in most of their offerings for it. Now as you can see, the solid base bullet has a very simple design. It does not have a dual core design like a Partition. It's not bonded like an AccuBond. It does not have a polymer ballistic tip like the ballistic tip does. Nope, it just has a solid base and a tapered jacket that gets gradually thicker as you go towards the base of the bullet. So that is a much simpler, easier to make, less expensive to manufacture bullet. Now Nosler says that this solid base projectile delivers a good mix of expansion and penetration that is ideally suited for use on deer-sized game. So it's not nearly as tough as an AccuBond or a Partition, but at the same time it also doesn't need to be so tough if you're only hunting whitetail deer with it. Now Nosler produced the solid base bullet from about 1972 into the mid-1980s, and at that point they replaced it with the ballistic tip. The ballistic tip is very similar, but it has a polymer tip that increases the ballistic coefficient of the bullet. So that makes it a good choice for use on thin-skinned game like deer, like antelope, at longer range, but it's also a little bit more expensive to manufacture than the solid base bullet. Now, like I said, the ballistic tip is a great deer and antelope bullet, especially if you got to take a shot at several hundred yards. But it's really just more than what a lot of people need for whitetail deer hunting. Right, I'm out here in East Texas where I do a lot of my deer hunting. As you can see, these woods are pretty thick. There's no way I would ever take a 200-yard shot in this area. And I've shot most of the deer that I've hunted in this area between 50 and 125 yards. Most of them were within 100 yards. So with that in mind and realizing that a lot of people are in a similar boat as me, Nosler decided to build a line of ammunition that is more optimized for hunters in conditions like this, that doesn't have a lot of the fancy bells and whistles that the ballistic tip does, or the AccuBond or the Partition. That's great for these conditions, that's great for whitetail deer, and also doesn't cost that much money. So for that reason, Nosler brought back the old solid base bullet for their new Whitetail Country line of ammo. Now they currently offer several different loadings in this line of ammunition in a couple different cartridges. They have a 140 grain offering in 6.5 Creedmoor, a 130 grain offering in 270 Winchester, a 140 grain offering in 7mm 08 Remington, a 150 grain offering in 30-30 Winchester, and 165 grain offerings in 308 and 30-06. And as you can see, that's what I have here. All of those loads I just mentioned use that solid base bullet. Now Nosler also released loads in 350 Legend and 4570 Government with 180 grain and 300 grain bullets respectively. They don't use the exact same solid base bullet as the cartridges I just mentioned. They use a similar bullet with a thinner jacket that is optimized for the slower velocities of the 350 Legend and the 4570 Government. So they still work fine in those cartridges, and they are legal to use for those of you that hunt deer in a so-called straight wall state. All of those loads retail for $34.95 right now as I record this. The exception is the 4570. That's a little bit more expensive at $39.95. But all of them are pretty reasonably priced, especially compared to a lot of the other stuff you see from Nosler. Now that is all well and good, but how does that stuff actually perform? Well, I hunted with the 308 Winchester loading myself, and I shot it a lot at the range last fall. I was very pleased with it. Now, I shot it out of my Winchester Model 70 featherweight rifle. This is a post-64 manufacture date, so it's nothing special. 22-inch long barrel. I do a lot of my testing of 308 ammo with that rifle. It's a solid rifle, but there's, like I said, there's nothing special about it. It is not a tack driver by any stretch of the imagination. I'm normally getting 2.5, maybe 3 MOA with a lot of the ammo that I shoot out of that rifle. But I will say that that rifle really liked this Whitetail Country ammo, and it shot it, actually along with the Nosler ballistic tip ammo with that 165 grain ballistic tip bullet. It shot both of those loads really well. That's some of the best shooting ammo I've ever shot out of this rifle. It was not sub MOA, but it was close. I was getting 1.25 to 1.5 MOA with both of these loads out of that rifle. And like I said, that's really good for that rifle. So I was very pleased with the accuracy for it. Same thing with velocity. Nosler advertises a velocity of 2,800 feet per second with that 165 grain bullet. This rifle has a 22-inch long barrel. I measured it at an average of about 2770 feet per second. So really good considering that it was a barrel length a little bit shorter than what Nosler was probably advertising those velocities at. Most companies use a 24-inch long barrel, so that would work out to about 15 foot per second of velocity lost per inch of barrel, which is really good. So right there with what I was expecting out of this stuff. So it shot well. The velocity I was getting out of it was real close as well. No reliability issues either. Now, before I went hunting with this stuff, I also tested it out in ballistic gel. The results were very impressive. It had a very short neck, which is that initial amount of space the bullet travels within the gel before it starts to expand. You want a pretty short neck here. That's what you get with a lot of good hunting ammo. This ammo was no exception. It also produced a very impressive wound cavity, very wide, and it was also pretty long, and I got great penetration out of it. 29.5 inches of penetration in this clear gel. Expansion was really good. Same thing with weight retention. So all in all, results were impressive, especially for a simple cup and core bullet like that at close range. I shot that gel at 50 yards. Now, it is worth mentioning that ballistic gel test results do not translate one-to-one from the gel into an animal when you're using clear gel like I was. But they can provide a useful comparison to compare how this ammo compares versus that other ammo. And this sort of wound cavity and penetration for the Whitetail Country ammo was excellent, and it compared very favorably to other 308 Winchester loads that I tested. For instance, it did really well compared to Nosler's 165 grain ballistic tip loading for the 308. Now, under the same conditions, out of the same rifle, the solid base bullet penetrated deeper and made a slightly more narrow wound cavity than that 165 grain ballistic tip. The ballistic tip expanded to a larger diameter and retained less weight though. This jives with what I would think. The ballistic tip seems like it's a little bit softer of a bullet than the solid base. I think it's a better, longer range projectile, but if you're hunting at closer range, like a lot of whitetail deer hunters are, like me, then this sort of performance from the solid base bullet is outstanding, and it's a little bit better than the ballistic tip, though the ballistic tip is not bad. Now, all of that is in bare gel. I also shot this ammo into ballistic gel with a shoulder blade from a 200-pound feral hog embedded in it. Now, that is not exactly the same as a deer shoulder blade, but it is still reasonably close, and it does give us an idea of how this bullet will perform in a situation like that, where the bullet encounters a much tougher medium. Now, penetration was still surprisingly good in this case, so it didn't penetrate quite as deep, but still did really well. The wound cavity was actually a little bit smaller in the gel test where I shot the shoulder blade, though it was not a giant difference. It was smaller, but just a little bit smaller. Now, the bullet was clearly subjected to more stress when it impacted that shoulder blade in the way that it did. And I'm theorizing that when it hit that shoulder blade, it ripped some chunks off of the bullet that resulted in that little bit lower weight retention and also slightly smaller expanded diameter. So the end result was the bullet was both lighter and more narrow in diameter after hitting the shoulder blade versus just hitting the bare gel. You know, it didn't completely go to pieces. The core jacket didn't separate any of that stuff. Yeah, it lost more pieces of it and it weighed less, but it still did really well. Now, I have tested some other cup and core bullets that did not make it as far as this one did in gel after going through the shoulder blade like that when I tested those other bullets in bare gel. So, like I said, I'm really impressed with how this stuff performed. So that's all well and good. It did great at the range. It did great in gel. How did it actually do afield? Well, I ended up shooting a medium-sized doe down here in Texas with it last fall. Shot distance was about 55 yards, so it was almost exactly as far as my shots into ballistic gel. Results were impressive. She dropped it instantly at the shot. Now, I shot that deer in her left armpit just behind the left shoulder. She was quartering slightly away from me, and I shot her just a little bit behind the shoulder blade in that crease. Due to the shot angle, the bullet punched through the ribs, hit the left lung, took off the top of the heart, hit the right lung, then exited the ribs and the front of the shoulder on the right side of the animal. Now, what makes the performance of that bullet even more impressive was that it hit squarely between two ribs. Thus, the bullet only contacted the hide and a small amount of muscle between the ribs before encountering the lungs. So the bullet made a very small entrance hole, but even so, and even though it did not encounter very much resistance initially, it still rapidly expanded and inflicted massive damage to the lungs, and then left a gigantic exit wound on the off side of the rib cage. Now, the bullet did also produce a substantial, though not gigantic, exit wound on the doe's right shoulder. This doe dropped right in her tracks. Tracking was not necessary, but if she would have run, that exit wound, like I observed, would have likely resulted in a pretty easy to follow blood trail that would have made things easier to find her if she would have indeed run off. I did lose a little bit of meat off that deer, especially on that right side shoulder, but I would not say that it ruined an excessive amount of meat. Part of that was due to my behind the shoulder initial shot placement, and I will say that you probably could lose a lot of meat if you shot a deer that was, say, close to broadside, squarely through both shoulders with this ammunition, especially at close range like I did. Now, I also know several other people that have used the Whitetail Country ammunition with success on deer. I'll give you a couple of examples. For instance, Phil Macero also used the 165 grain 308 loading of this ammunition, shot a buck in New York with it. He said it shot very accurately out of his rifle, did phenomenal on this deer. Another listener used this ammo in 6.5 Creedmoor to take a doe and a nice 8-point buck in the 2024 deer season. The doe dropped in her tracks. The buck ran about 75 yards afterwards. Those bullets inflicted massive internal damage to the vitals of both deer. It is worth noting the bullets did not exit either of these two deer though. So while I say this ammunition is built to increase the probability of an exit wound, that is not guaranteed to always occur. Even so, they still worked great in this case on these two deer. Now, another listener used the 350 Legend version of this ammo on a button buck in Pennsylvania. He said he shot it right behind the shoulder. Distance was about 35 yards. He said that this deer ran about 75 yards. It's possible that that deer went on a hell for leather death run like white-tailed deer do sometimes. He did not recover the bullet because it exited. He said that the chest cavity was a mess. It basically obliterated the top of the heart, the plumbing coming off of it, and most of both lungs. So he said that he was also very impressed with how it performed, and he said that he was especially happy with how it has performed for him versus some of the other loadings he has used for the 350 Legend in the past. So the initial impressions that I have and these people that I know have had of this ammo have been really good, both at the range and afield. So now we'll talk about the pros and cons of this ammunition. First, First pro is affordability. Price of this stuff is great. Second, great terminal performance. This stuff is optimized for use on whitetail deer. So if you are hunting whitetail deer, the results I've gotten in gel and on actual deer afield, both me and the people that I know, have been excellent. All the bullets have exited, they've all just wrecked the vitals of those animals. So it gives you a really good mix of a wide, devastating wound cavity combined with enough penetration on a deer-sized animal to give you a good chance of an exit wound from most shot angles. So the results have been really good. You've had either very short tracking jobs or no tracking jobs for all these deer that I just mentioned, and in the cases where they did run, they left a pretty good blood trail. So that's always what we like to see. Accuracy has also been really great. So that'd be number 3. I'm not talking sub MOA accuracy all the time. I'm not saying you're going to be able to go and win a shooting match with this stuff, but it is accurate enough that it works well at the ranges most people are going to be using it at. And it's also available in most of the popular deer hunting cartridges. Like I said, 6.5 Creedmoor, 708, 270, 30-30, 30-06, 308, 350 Legend, 4570. So there's some cartridges that did indeed get left out of that, and maybe Nosler will remedy that situation in the future, but that's a lot of the bread and butter cartridges most people are deer hunting with right now. Now, as much as I do like this ammo, it is not perfect, and there are some cons associated with it. And one of those is the somewhat limited availability of cartridges. Or for instance, they don't have a 243. They don't have a 450 Bushmaster offering. They don't have a 7 Rim Mag or a 300 Win Mag. So it's got a lot of the really popular stuff, but not necessarily everything. So if you use one of those other cartridges, well, right now you can't use that ammo. And in that same vein, this is lead core ammunition. And so if you live in California and you have to hunt with lead-free ammo, sorry, this isn't an option for you right now. Now, another con of this ammo is the somewhat low ballistic coefficient of these bullets. Like I said, this stuff does not have a polymer tip on it, just got a plain lead front to it and a flat, solid base like that. So this isn't great stuff for long range hunting, but that's also not what it is designed for. Like I said, a lot of people hunt in woods just like you see behind me, where you're not going to take a very long shot. If you're shooting something out to 200 yards or so, ballistic coefficient does not matter at all. So if you stick to the intended use for this stuff, which is hunting whitetail deer at shorter to moderate range like this, it'll work great. If that's not your situation, then you need to use something else, maybe like the Nosler ballistic tip ammo. Much higher BC with that stuff, different cartridge offerings in it. It's a more specialized, more expensive bullet, but if it is appropriate for your situation, then it might make sense to use that ammunition. Now, in that same vein, along with, say, this stuff being a little bit less suitable for a longer range shot on an open country hunt, it's not super versatile in terms of using it on bigger game. Sure, you can use it on a feral hog. Some people have done that. You could use it on a black bear. It would work okay on that as well. But remember, this isn't a premium bonded bullet like an AccuBond. It doesn't have that dual core construction like a partition. If you're going elk hunting, you're going moose hunting, you're going to Africa or something, I would point you towards a partition or something like that for that. This is great for deer hunting, but that is where I would focus your use cases with this ammo. And the last con for it is the price. The price is both a pro and a con. This stuff is less expensive than something like a partition or an AccuBond, but it's also a little bit more expensive than some of the really inexpensive lines out there from other companies. It's a little bit more expensive than, say, a Winchester PowerPoint or a Remington Core Lock, even say Hornady's American Whitetail stuff is a little bit less expensive. I personally think the Nosler Whitetail Country ammo is a little bit better than that stuff. I've gotten better accuracy with this stuff out of my rifle than those other lines. Terminal performance on game and in gel has also been better with the Nosler ammo. Not to say that that stuff is bad or that it won't work, because it will, but I think this stuff is a little bit better, but that also justifies a little bit higher price point. So if you are very, very price conscious and you need to be saving every dollar you can on ammo, this stuff is affordable and inexpensive, but it is not the least expensive stuff that you can get out there for deer hunting either. So all in all, I think Nosler Whitetail Country ammunition is absolutely outstanding ammunition for what it is designed for, which is hunting whitetail deer at short to moderate range. And really, that describes a gigantic percentage of the hunters in the United States. You can get nicer and more specialized stuff out there, but most people don't really need it. This stuff will work wonderfully at a great price point for the sort of hunting most people are doing. So let me know your thoughts on this subject. Have you hunted with this ammunition yourself? Do you know anyone that has? Leave a comment on this video. Let me know what you think of it. Let me know what your experiences were with this stuff afield. Now, if you want to learn more about this ammunition, to see some more detailed photos of this deer that I shot with it that I can't show on YouTube, click the link in the show notes. Check out my Patreon page. I have a free post that you can check out, detailed terminal performance photos of this bullet on that whitetail doe to give you an even more in-depth assessment of how this stuff performed. Like I said, it's a free post. You can check all that stuff out. It's just the sort of thing I can't put on YouTube. There's a link to it in the video description and in the pinned comment. So that'll do it for this video. Thanks a lot for watching. Happy hunting.